Hello, good evening. Welcome to this evening's Thursday night book club. And I am going to share my screen so you can see the program that we have this evening. So let me just do that. Okay, right. Okay, so yes, welcome again to the Thursday night book club. And my name is Zindika, and this is the Thursday night book club representing the Mindfulness Network for People of Color. Yes, I am the host, Zindika Kamausi, and we're going to start off with an opening meditation this evening, and then we're going to have an introduction to our guests. So this evening I'm in conversation with Dr. Kamilah Majied and her book, which is called Joyfully Just, Black Wisdom and Buddhist Insights for Liberated Living. And we will go through that conversation, interview. Dr. Kamilah will present her book. And then at the end, she will also be sharing some brief practices from her book and also a closing meditation. So let's continue. Before I jump into that opening meditation this evening, let's just start by just calming ourselves. And I say here, before we speak, we begin with calm. So whenever you see this, begin with calm before we drop into listening to what's going to be shared this evening. We gather our thoughts. We become open to receiving knowledge, information. We become open to sharing. We become open to caring for each other. We do our best and embrace the space in respect of truth and in the spirit of togetherness and oneness. So let's just take in a breath and just breathe. So we're going to practice breathe, smile, be. And we're just taking this moment to connect with our breath and with ourselves. And as we settle into the breath, we're just breathing in and out and really being aware of our inhale and our exhale. So breathe. Smile. Be. Breathe. Smile. Be. So taking a breath for calm. Breath for peace in the world. Breath for relaxation. And as we share this evening, just watching and observing the breath. And just breathing in and out. Following our inhale, following our exhale. And as we do that, we just allow all the tension to just dissolve. Bring ourselves into calm. And we're just breathing and keeping that smile. Releasing all the tension, any mind chatter that's going on, dispersing and just allowing it to disappear this evening before we drop into our session. Tell yourself you're calm, open, and relaxed before this presentation. So breathe in a smile. Breathe, smile, and be here, be now. And let's just take in a smile, take in a breath, and release it with a sigh as we are going to come back to the space this evening. And back to us, to myself, and to our guest this evening, Dr. Kamilah Majied. Yes. So, yes, Kamilah, thank you. Thank you for being here this evening. And just before we go into your presentation, I just want to just read briefly a little bit from your biography this evening. And let me just start with what you do really, which is Dr. Kamilah Majied, PhD, is a mental health therapist, clinical educator, researcher, author, and of course, we're going to be looking at her latest book this evening, and internationally engaged consultant on building inclusivity and equity using meditative practices. She is a professor of social work at California State University, Monterey Bay, and she's the founder of Majied Contemplative Consulting, where she uses meditative practices in diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership development. Really looking forward to hearing more about this as our discussion develops shortly. So, Dr. Kamilah Majied is the author of Joyfully Just, Black Wisdom and Buddhist Insights for Liberated Living, which is published by Sounds True. It's just published this year in April. Wow. So a new book. Okay, so Dr. Majied is a contributing author of Black Buddhists, What Buddhism Can Teach Us About Race, Resilience, Transformation, and Freedom, the first anthology of African American Buddhist wisdom. She also narrated the audio version of this book. She is the author of multiple published articles, podcasts, and webinars on contemplative practice. So, Dr. Majied, welcome. You're well accomplished, Kamilah. And if I missed anything out there, which I'm sure I did, then please do expand as you go through your presentation. And yes, I'd like to just start, with that by asking you to tell us a bit more, really more about your book, Joyfully Just, so that we can delve a bit further into this.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome and for that lovely meditation at the beginning. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you all to talk about Joyfully Just, Black Wisdom and Buddhist Insights for Liberated Living, especially because in the book I talk about reading itself as a contemplative practice. So I'm a big fan of book clubs because book clubs themselves can bring us into a certain level of mindfulness, right? A certain level of insight, and a certain level of our sense of interdependence or interconnection. So I love coming to book clubs because I love books. From a very early age, my mother, Layla Majied, really had me reading. Like I remember reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou when I was 7. And I remember because she's narrating from the point of a 7-year-old girl herself in the book. And in Joyfully Just, I talk a lot about how the insights, especially from the literature from Black, Indigenous, people of color populations, is itself a means of practicing mindfulness. Engaging with the great literature is itself a way of becoming more mindful. And in the book, I talk about Black wisdom traditions like music, particularly music from the African diaspora, and more specifically African American music, as a very good example of how African Americans, for example, have really transformed suffering to create art. And, Buddhism and mindfulness is about, becoming aware of our suffering to create insight from it. So that's kind of the connection in the book. A lot of people are like, well, how are Buddhism and Black wisdom traditions connected, and what are Black wisdom traditions? So when I talk about Black wisdom traditions in the book, I'm really talking about cultural practices that have enabled people from the African diaspora to be grounded, to be mindful, long before this, contemporary mindfulness movement began. African dance grounded us. And certainly music of all kinds grounded us in the rhythm and cadence of our own being. And that music making was reflected in our drumming, reflected in our singing, and particularly reflected in the ways that we sang to gain insight about and to gain self-transcendence over suffering. So, for example, if you think about gospel music and blues music, in the, as they were developed here in the US, both of those, and have now become international phenomena, both of those began with enslaved African Americans singing during enslavement. And many people dismiss that as, oh, they're just entertaining themselves. But actually, it was a meditative practice. It was a mindfulness practice that dropped people, enslaved African people, into awareness of our undefeatable, unchainable divinity and our unchainable freedom. There's songs in the gospel tradition like I Shall Not Be Moved, and I sing because I'm happy, I sing because I'm free. And these songs developed by people in enslavement, or just barely out of enslavement, really speak to the part of the human spirit that cannot be chained, cannot be separated from its embeddedness, from our embeddedness in nature. So there's just so much wisdom in these musical traditions. And, I argue that, or I invite people to consider that the reason they're so copied, including hip hop. Like hip hop is a genre of Black music that allows people to step into a sense of power or empowerment, right? And so, all of the genres of Black jazz speaks to kind of what's indefinable and what's kind of transcendent and always changing about living. So I have a few sections in the book where I talk about Black music and actually give readers an opportunity to practice with different genres of Black music, to drop into awareness and insight, and also to kind of walk with a little bit more kind of gratitude and awareness of our interconnection. Yeah, there's lots of juicy stuff, and I wish I had 4 hours to talk about the book, but I'm gonna try to go over just a few things in the short time we have.
Wonderful. Yes, I'm really excited and really like the progression of what you're saying, And in the idea that was coming through to me is that mindfulness is socially progressive, and the way you've linked it to um, black black culture, African American culture, and where you've linked it, how, and really I like that idea of how it transforms suffering, and that you see that within Buddhism and how we practice like that, how we've always been that way. We've always been finding ways to transform our suffering. And and the fact that that's done through the creative art. And as we know, African Americans are very creative in terms of their artists, their art and their creativity. And also, you mentioned grounding and idea of dance and music and singing, all of that, especially that grounding. I mean, I'm really a big fan of, grounding. I do that all the time, and linking that to nature as well. And so what I'd like to know a bit more about you teach us about mindfulness and racial justice and also Buddhism. And also you also talk about it in context of also mental health as well. Could you give us some examples of how you do this?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the main things that I do, one of my main roles is, as a psychotherapist, but I also teach psychotherapy to graduate students who want to become therapists. And I work with a lot of mental health organizations as well as educational organizations and activist groups around healing healing injustice, right? Because a lot of people think about as of injustice and racism and sexism and ableism and all the isms as kind of social problems, maybe even legal problems, but don't really recognize that these are also psychological and emotional problems that cause a lot of psychological and emotional stress. But also the fact that people are, deeply racist or homophobic or all of that also reflects a level of psychological distress. So as a therapist, I've had a chance to work with people who are who were convicted of hate crimes and, who really had oppressive ideas. So from that, I really learned um, how damaging the racism and the white supremacy that we all absorb from society is, and how, many BIPOC people, many Black, Indigenous people of color, or people of the global majority, as I sometimes use that term, um, really sometimes internalize the white supremacist or, kind of self-deprecating ideas about ourselves or about other people of color, right? So maybe Asians will have a certain perspective about Latinx people, or African Americans will have a certain perspective about indigenous people, right? That reflects how we have absorbed white supremacy. So one of the things I really work to do with a lot of organizations is, of course, help white people, white racialized people, look at their racism, look at how it's actually a compromised aspect of their psychology, how white fragility is an actual psychological weakness, but also in helping Black people and Indigenous people and Asian people and Latinx people look at the ways we've internalized racism and how it's made us unwell. Because a core idea or a core concept that I've learned from both my research and, my practice with people and my own life is that the more that we have a sense of how to treat ourselves with justice and to be in the world in a way that's just, the more well we are. One of the quotes from the book that has been kind of spread around a lot is that well minds nurture justice, and just minds nurture wellness. So there's a relationship between being able to treat ourselves and one another in a just way and to be connected to the realm of justice and the capacity to be well and to be joyful. A lot of times people think, well, if I just don't think about social injustice, then I'll be happier because it's depressing. But the truth is, it exists. We're absorbing it. All the injustice and in the world we're absorbing it because we're immersed in the world, and that there isn't any freedom for us in avoidance, but there is freedom for us in responsibility and engaging in the world. So, I invite people in the book. I mentioned how people can just put social justice on our calendar, and engaging in justice as part of our work, because in so doing, we naturally come to excise the ways that uh, oppressive ideas have gotten absorbed in us. Like nobody wakes up and says, oh, I'm going to be homophobic or I'm going to be transphobic or I'm going to be ableist today. But because society is so full of these ideas, we get them from media, even certainly in schools, we get them, we just absorb them in so many places that before we know it, we're thinking a certain way and, we're having ourselves limited by all these oppressive ideas. But if we make a commitment and it's part of our daily or at least weekly kind of ritual to cleanse oppressive ideas, do an oppression cleanse, and to do it in our meditative practice and also, enact it in the world, then we're more insightful and free, right? That we don't want to have a mindfulness practice that's so that's inward focused only on being blissed out and happy, right? I just want to feel good because all of our freedom doesn't reside in feeling good. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to share a couple of slides
Yeah,
from the
sure.
book.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just jump in here. Oh, okay. So now I'm gonna start with
Oh,
talking about. Oh, there we go. Well, yeah, this is just kind of what I said about what I do, how I do a lot of inclusivity and equity consulting. And by the way, the QR code both on my screen and on this slide will lead you to my website if you want to kind of see more of the talks and things that I've done there. Also, there's a place to order the book and, contact me information there too. But moving on, again, the reason that I focus on Buddhism and Black wisdom together in the book is because we all have these spiritual and religious traditions. And of course, the spiritual and religious traditions of Black people are diverse, and Buddhist lineages are diverse. I practice in the Mahayana lineage of Nichiren Buddhism with the Soka Gakkai International. So we all have many different lineages. But many secular Black wisdom traditions and the overarching Buddhist principles share a lot of common insights. For example, Black musical traditions illustrate the unity of suffering and joy and the possibility of self-transcendence and enlightenment in any circumstance. That there's so much about Black music and Black life that illustrates this. Just what's popping to my mind now is a song from Fela Kuti where he talks about suffering and smiling. I don't know if anybody knows this song, but it's one of those songs that has, to me, two different meanings. Like Fela is saying every day my people suffering and smiling. And on some level, he's talking about how, because of white supremacy, we have to smile even when we don't want to, right? Because otherwise we're perceived as threatening. It's like, why aren't you smiling? Why aren't you happy? Especially, and that's crazy from people who have every right to be unhappy, people who are targeted. But then another way, so one meaning of that song is about how, you know, uh, Black people are expected to be smiling, right? Fela says, every day, all across the world, all over the world, my people are suffering and smiling. But then another part and another meaning of that song is how people are self-transcending. People are transcending the suffering. They're not letting the suffering defeat our smile. One of my Buddhist mentors, Kanako Ikeda, talks about how the smile is not always in response to circumstances, right? That I can be smiling because I'm deciding to be the master of my emotional state. Or I can be not smiling because I don't want to present myself as, deferential in a time when seriousness is called for. But to really think about that, the freedom to smile whenever we want to smile, and also to think about smiling through suffering as a self-transcendent opportunity when it is. And Pema Chodron talks about that too. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist teacher, has a book called Smile at Fear. And, I mentioned that in the book, and I talk a little bit about how yeah, fear can feel really daunting, and our psychological and emotional struggles, our grief can feel really daunting. But what if we treated it like a companion and just kind of smiled at our fears? Like, oh, there you go again, right? And then let ourselves have a little bit more levity around it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And the title of your book as well, I'm seeing now how the titles, what it means and what's behind it, because it's always great. I love titles. So it's always good, to actually could you expand a little bit more on that, the joyfully just and the image as well.
Absolutely. It's so funny because I really, when you write a book, you're like, oh, you want to call it you want to have a 9,000 page title because you want the title to really be, encapsulating everything that the book is about. But the title Joyfully Just is really that, there is a piece of our joy that we simply cannot have if we don't face injustice, if we don't look at how oppressive ideas have been absorbed in our own minds and lives, there's a piece of our joy that's blocked from us. And there's certainly a great deal of our joy that's blocked if we aren't engaged in justice in the world. That's a part of how we experience the deepest joy and the deepest sense of connection we can have in the world is by being engaged for justice. That because all human beings are seeking, justice, right? Is seeking equity, seeking the resources we need, and also seeking the valuation that we need, right? So BIPOC people who I also refer to as people of the global majority, Barbara Love, professor from Amherst University at UMass, or University of Massachusetts Amherst, coined this term, people of the global majority, as a way of describing um, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian people so that people can get out of this idea of thinking about us as minorities and so that we can stop thinking of ourselves as minorities. But however we refer to ourselves, it's very valuable for people who are not white to really look at the ways that our lives are impacted by injustice and to be empowered around that, empowered to joyfully engage in justice for our own lives and for the lives of those around us. Because so much of the time we hear about working for justice as a struggle and got to fight, but we often forget of how joyful that can be, especially when it's grounded in contemplative practice. In the book, I talk about MLK and how he had a very deep spiritual practice that made it possible for him to also have a wonderful sense of humor as he engaged for justice. The same is true for Madiba. The same is true for many, many, many kind of noted leaders, and that's a freedom and joy that we can all access. So throughout the book, I offer a lot of different practices for people to look at where we've absorbed injustice and unjust ideas, and then, practice releasing them as part of our mindfulness practice. So, what we are mindful of, yes, we're mindful of the breath, we're mindful of the body, we're mindful of how the mind and body and heart, the emotional aspect, is really important, how all these aspects of ourselves have absorbed white supremacy, and we make part of our mindfulness practice removing these toxins of white supremacy from our minds, from our emotions, and from our behavior. And that frees up, so much joy, because it's one thing to look at the world and say, oh, there's so much injustice out there. But if we look a little bit more closely, we'll see that it's actually impacted us and it's inside us. So, for example, in chapter 3 of the book, I talk about power and playfulness, and how a lot of the times for many of us when we were young, um, because of adultism, or what's also known as young people's oppression, we were, robbed of some of our power. Maybe we might have been, treated harshly or silenced, even just silenced a lot, told children should be seen and not heard. And, you'll know more when you're older, and you're too childish, right? Like all of these things kind of dismissing our way of being when we are young. The author James Baldwin talks about how youth is made useless to young people because their people are so oppressed during their youth and they have no freedoms, right? So people are like, oh, you should be happy, you're young. It's like, how can I be happy? Everybody's telling me when I can go to the bathroom, that I don't know anything, that I'm going to know more when I'm older. Parents and teachers certainly parents have the right to hit me sometimes, or deprive me of food, or send me to bed. So I talk a lot about in chapter 3 of the Power and Playfulness chapter of the book, which is chapter 3. I talk about how what power was robbed from you as a young person, and so I'll kind of lead a little practice here that'll allow us to have a little bit of an exploration of that. So
Yes, please do. Please do.
so one of the practices in the book, you know, I I always start with a simple kind of meditation that allows us to kind of gather all the parts of ourselves, because of the first part of being joyfully just is being welcoming to all aspects of our own being. So just allowing our bodies to be in a position that feels easeful, letting the breath occur naturally, not forcing it. If the awareness of the breath makes you feel like you want to breathe more deeply, go ahead and do so. Just letting the breath guide you to awareness of this body, this physical entity that you're moving through the world in. Awareness of the body's places of ease, where the body feels good, if the breathing is clear, if you're able to feel the ground under your feet. Breathing in awareness and breathing out gratitude for all that is well with the body. And then noticing if there's any painful parts or tight parts or uncomfortable parts of the body, and welcoming that into our awareness too. Yeah, welcome pain. You're letting me know what my body needs, that my body has needs. I can be aware of pain and welcome it. It's part of the process of being in a body. And in the same way, kind of welcoming the mind, whether the mind is still or whether the mind is thinking, just not grabbing at any thoughts, not pushing any thoughts away, just noticing and being aware of the mind. Here's my mind. And I welcome my mind with all its peace and all its frenzy, welcoming our minds the way they are. And then noticing the heart, the emotional aspect, whatever the heart is feeling, whether it's feeling happy or it's feeling stressed, just notice the heart without grabbing or pushing away any feelings, noticing our capacity to feel. Breathing in awareness of this heart, this magnificent heart that can feel so much. And breathing out gratitude and welcome to our hearts and emotions. And in the same way, breathing in awareness of our spirit, the part of ourselves that is unnameable, but so connected to all of life and to all people, to our ancestors and teachers and spirit guides, and welcoming the vastness of our spirit that's with us at each moment. The first step in being joyfully just is just embracing all aspects of our being and noticing the parts that hurt and welcoming those too. So to extend the practice, I want to invite you into kind of self-guided drumming practice. We all have a rhythm and a cadence of our own lives, right? That at any given moment, your heart, mind, your blood is flowing and producing a certain rhythm. So for this practice here, I'd like you to join me in just making music of this moment. So simply drum your fingers to whatever beat they move naturally. Don't try to direct them, just drumming your fingers on the table near you, or if you're sitting on the floor, drumming on the floor or on your lap. It's a way of really literally tapping into what's your life rhythm at this moment. Let's take about 30 seconds and tap your rhythm. And that as you do that, you can start to notice what's your drumming like? What's your, natural rhythm that's coming through your fingers like? Is it slow and methodical, rapid, energetic? What's the sensation of feeling you're having as you drum? Are there any thoughts, or are you just free from thoughts and noticing your body's rhythm through the drumming? We're all living works of art. And so right now, as you drum, you're manifesting your life as artistry via this drumming. And now, to move forward with the practice a little, I'd like for you to drum, what was your youth like, right? See if the rhythm of your drumming changes when you reflect on being a child and being a teenager. Noticing the ways you were free, but also noticing any ways you may have experienced that young people's oppression I was talking about, that silencing or devaluation. Maybe it even happened as a young adult. And you can tap that out too. Literally kind of drum it out of your life, the residual feelings from any oppression you experienced as a young person. When was the first time you experienced racism? Does your drumming change? Does your finger drumming change as I ask you that question? Do you have a different rhythm coming through the drumming of your fingers? Maybe thinking about the last time you experienced something racist. Our bodies are wonderful ways, have limitless wonderful ways of both tapping into awareness and drumming painful, toxic experiences out of us. So as you move your fingers, envision releasing the injustice you experienced, whether it was as a youth or the injustice you witnessed. Envision drumming it out of your life. And also envision, what practice would you like to continue to do? What action could help you continue to drum this out of your life? So thank you for doing that practice with me. Um, it's really a very simple practice that you can do anytime. I included it in the book for exactly that reason. And
Yeah,
because I talk so much about music making, but that our body is always making music. Our heartbeat is telling us, whether we're calm or anxious, right? So to tap into what the biorhythm already is by, kind of drumming our fingers either on our lap or on a desk at hand can
yeah,
can actually be something that brings us into mindfulness and insight. And that's what I talk about in the book, how a lot of times we think that mindfulness is always and only just kind of these Buddhist derived things. But, people from all over the world have been finding ways to drop into mindfulness. There's limitless ways. So in the book, I offer several unique ways. What was that like for
yes.
you,
That
Zindika?
that 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 was good. I enjoyed that because I mean, of course, drumming is an earliest form of communication, and even a long distance communication. Drumming. Um, but the first practice, I started off drumming my fingers, like drumming two or three fingers. And more really tuning into the rhythm I was creating with it. But then and as you moved into the second practice, which was about releasing, I found that I started to use all like both my hands and all my fingers were drumming, and so it really sort of really came into its own when you said release everything, especially from your childhood. And I found I was using my whole hand because I wanted to release everything. So yeah, so that really worked for me. I was like, yes, I could really feel my whole body really sort of getting into it, really, which is a good place to be when you're actually releasing. So thank you for that practice. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you found it valuable. I mean, and it's one of the ways that we can see kind of a lot of BIPOC leadership, all throughout the world, because many of our Black, our Latinx, our Indigenous, our Asian cultures have some type of drumming. Um, and a lot of the times people think, well, you need a drum to be a drummer. But what I'm saying is that we're all natural drummers. Our bodies are the drum, right? And we can let the music come through. Like you've seen those people kind of beating on, plastic tubs in the subway, like whatever they have, because life has a rhythm that kind of needs to be expressed. And when we express what our life rhythm is, we gain awareness of it. Because sometimes we don't know what's going on with ourselves until we have a practice that drops us into it. And that's just one example. But there are many, many kind of diverse practices that draw particularly on Black and African wisdom traditions, like the traditions related to music and drumming. I also, talk a lot in the book about, so chapter, just to kind of walk you through it a little bit, chapter one talks about, well, what is contemplative practice? And again, that's where I say, anything that drops us into awareness. For some people, their mindfulness is in gardening, right? They go out to the garden, they put their hands in the soil, and it's like that drops them into awareness of being sustained by the earth and being in a relationship with the earth and the sun and the soil and the water. And I have whole sections of the book where I talk about in kind of nature bathing and being engaged with nature. And also, though, I talk about the ways that sometimes BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian people have been, kind of separated from the prettiest places or the hiking spaces, right? That those haven't always been accessible and welcoming to us, and how we can, reclaim our natural relationship with the environment. That itself is an act of justice towards ourselves and an act of justice in the world. So I talk a lot about all kinds of contemplative practices in chapter one, in the introduction to the book. And then I talk about power and playfulness. And then also in chapter four, I talk about mindful engagement with media and arts, right? Right. And when I say media, I mean everything. Of course, social media, like what does it look like to have a joyfully just relationship with social media where are doing it, or if to the extent that you use it, if you use it at all, you do it in a way that protects your psychological and emotional well-being, and that creates justice for yourself and in the world, right? That it's not like that we actually use our meditative practices to guide how and if we engage with social media. And we also use our engagement with other kinds of media, like if watching movies. One of the things I'm planning to organize for later in the year is a mindful movie watch party, a mindful watch party, right? A joyfully just watch party where we select a film and we practice. We do some practices at the beginning of the film, because we probably would choose something maybe a little challenging, maybe watch something like 13th or something like Origin, or even something like the movie American Fiction that takes on racism, right? But to ground ourselves before we do it, so that we really clear the field, so that the practice of watching the movie is actually one that grows insight, not just kind of it's fine if it makes us mad, or it's fine if we have feelings during it, but to not be, sipping rosé to manage those feelings, but really to be present with those feelings and allow ourselves to be transformed by the experience, and allow there to be a growth point, or maybe even points of action, ways that we'll treat ourselves better, or ways that we'll engage in the world based on the movie. So in the book, I talk about, everything that we do, that watching your favorite TV programs and certainly reading books can be a mindfulness practice, can be an opportunity to transform suffering and grow, can be the transmutation of suffering, but it can also be an action for justice. And to actually consider that first, right? So to set an intention and say, okay, the reason I'm doing this, right? My practice, my meditative practice, my Buddhist practice, is that I get up in the morning and I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo every morning. And when I do that, I'm envisioning and reflecting on how I can live the most wise and enlightened day today. And then, like what am I moving through during the day, and how can I manifest enlightenment in that? And then I come back in the evening and reflect on how did I do, and what is the intention I'd like to set for the night, and laying the ground for the next day tomorrow. So really just kind of living with a lot of intentionality and creating, and in this book, I've created a lot of practices that allow us to say, okay, this is my intention. So there's a lot of journaling practices in the book, but also places where, like, I invite people to think about books. Like, Zindinka, when I talk about books, what would you say is a book that you feel that's a novel, that's like fiction, but also kind of drops you into a meditative space? I mean, I talk about a lot of Toni Morrison's books as that, and James Baldwin's fiction, Just Above My Head, Toni Morrison's Beloved. There's so much in there that's meditative. Do you have books like that you find meditative?
Yes, well, whenever I read, I'm an author as well. So whenever I read or whenever I write, I find I go into a meditative state anyway. It just takes me to a different place. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such an avid reader and always have been, really, and reading and writing has brought me through lots and lots of difficulties, situations, and helped me to really confront some of the things in life when you were talking about, transcending, suffering and through the creative art. And that's definitely been my experience, that is a way we can use the creative art. But for you, in terms of your work, and we call the mindfulness for people of color, and a lot of your work has been around, creating these practices with people of color in mind. How have you found that journey? Has it been an easy journey? Has it been received well? How's that been?
Well, thank you for asking that. No, it has not been an easy journey. It's been a very painful journey. And it's funny because the biggest chapter in the book is chapter 5, and the title of that chapter is Joyful Suffering. Now, when people hear about that, they're like, what is joyful suffering? And in that chapter, I talk about joyful grieving, how, we all go through so much grief in life that it's a part loss and change, impermanence is just a part of life, whether it's losing your hair or your teeth or your job situation changing or your relationship changing or your joints are starting to deteriorate, that every aspect of our being and all of our relationships will undergo change, and eventually will undergo death, right? Will end, right? And so that coming in the book, I talk about really engaging that truth as a reality and working with it as something to actually that you can actually notice joy around the changes and the transitions in life. Like fall is my favorite season because in the US, and even though I don't have much of a fall now living on the West Coast, but I used to always look at the leaves. I still look at the leaves change in color and think about that this is the beauty of change and it is also the beauty of death. That if we can embrace, and Buddhism talks about this also, that studying death and exploring death is an opportunity to really embrace life, right? That when we turn towards it, instead of saying, oh no, I don't want to think about that, then we really live more richly. And that means the death of all things, of all changes, right? Because, everything about our bodies and minds and sometimes our emotions changes, right? And that if we embrace that, then we can certainly know more joy. So kind of the
Thank
final practice that I wanted to offer was around something around joyful grieving. Did you have a question about what I was
Okay.
saying?
Yes, thank you, Camilla. We're coming up soon towards the end of our conversation and this book club this evening. So, um, where can people get hold of more of your work? I know you've given that information already, but would you like to repeat some of it about how people can get more from you and your books, etc.?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you just go to KamilahMajied.com, that's just the full spelling of my name, KamilahMajied.com, then everything is there. You can also, you may be able to, if you're watching this recording, just scan it right from the QR code here on my screen, and that will take you to the same website. But also the book is available from every bookseller, whether you go to a local, bookseller or get it online, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I'm really encouraging people to use the Black bookstores or social justice bookstores, books that really try to feature justice-related material. So I encourage you, if you know of one of those, to patronize them. And if they don't have it, tell them to get it. They'll get it. And of course, if you have any difficulty locating the book, or you just want to reach out to me about how I can, offer a talk about the book with your organization or lead your organization through some practices related to the book, I'm happy to do that because I do a lot of that work. I work with a lot of educational institutions, therapists, activists, all different kinds of meditation and spiritual groups to really help us turn towards the injustice in the world and transform ourselves and the world with joy.
Okay, thank you, Camilla. And before we move into that closing practice with you, I like to ask my guests this. In terms of your work and your journey with Buddhism, is there any one thing that you would do differently?
Um, hmm, you know, I think not. I think the journey had to be exactly what it is for me to know exactly what I know. I feel like because I started practicing Buddhism so young when I was 17, that I've had the opportunity to walk the path I was supposed to. And do I wish I hadn't had to suffer certain things or make certain mistakes? Heck yes. And at the same time, those mistakes really guided me to so much wisdom that I wouldn't throw them back. Because you can't get the wisdom if you
Yeah.
don't have the suffering and transmute it. So,
Yes, of course. Yes, we learn from our mistakes. Yes. Okay, that's great. Okay, so are you ready to show us or a final practice to close the session?
yes, yes. The final practice, because in the end of the book, I talk about endings and, kind of facing the ending that is going to come for all of us. And to a lot of us, sometimes BIPOC people and lots of people don't make wills at all. And I certainly I have some practices and they're really encouraging people to make wills. But the most important will or the most important legacy offering is the spiritual one. And it's certainly for those of us who have a mindfulness practice. So for this last practice, I'd like for you to envision someone that is dear to you, right? And maybe writing if it feels good to write, but also just reflecting what is the non-material offering that I'd like to bequeath to them. And I draw this practice from African American educator Mary McLeod Bethune, who, you know, as she was approaching the end of her life after having led so much work to advance education for Black people in the uh, 19th and 20th century, her legacy, her bequest said, I leave you racial pride. I leave you dignity. I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave you commitment to nurture our young people. So envision someone that you care deeply about and make a non-material bequest. And it can be very specific. Like for my niece, I bequeath you, the courage and determination to continue to pursue your writing, right? That just take a 1 minute to consider what would you like to offer to your beloved that's non-spiritual. Just let's take 30 seconds to consider it and maybe write it down. What's your non-material legacy? What are the spiritual bequests you'd like to leave to specific persons? Of course, this is a practice that, I usually do in groups with people over time. I've had the opportunity to work with people who were facing a serious illness and like trying to get their affairs in order. But the reality of impermanence is we could all go anytime. So creating these kinds of spiritual bequests is a way of both saying, what would I write in a letter to my beloved, facing the fact, knowing that I could go anytime, what would I like to leave them? But it also has the effect of making us behave differently towards that person right now, right? So if I wrote that, for example, to my partner, I wish you healing from all the stress I caused you, then that might make me cause them less stress right now. So the thing about thinking about death and the ending of things is that, yes, it can help us prepare things to offer to people that are available to them when we're gone, but it also changes how we interact with them now. It's a mindfulness practice that enables us to consider how we enact with them now. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do that. I lead a lot of online events. So one of the things you can also do when you go to my website is sign up for the newsletter. I just sent a newsletter out yesterday about I'm doing a gathering for Gaza next week on the 18th. That's a free online event. And there's just lots of free opportunities for us to continue to engage together and talk about how we can be joyful in our efforts to be just towards ourselves and the world around us.
Thank you, Kamilah. And yes, thank you, Dr. Kamilah Majied, for coming in this evening with your book, Joyfully Just, which I've enjoyed hearing about. Yes, and I really enjoy the practices you shared. And you are an example of how we can change our lives by living spiritually with grace and knowledge, justice. And you're helping so many other people to do the same. So thank you for coming along to share that message and your wonderful book, which is, of course, full of depth, insight, practices. And I really appreciate your time for bringing us this work. May you be blessed, and may you have a calm evening or day. No, evening for us. May you have a calm rest of day today. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me, and thank you for this beautiful space that you create for people to reflect and grow. Thank you.